Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 115th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'd like to talk about the coronavirus a little bit again and talk about its significance for humanity, the meaning it has for humanity, why we're experiencing confinements, the whole vaccine debacle, and all those things beyond, with a kind of a spiritual vision, a multidimensional vision. So I think I've already covered a lot of things about um, the coronavirus in previous videos and its significance. But now I'd like to just look at a few other aspects. So just to recap, for those of you that didn't sort of follow my world vision, you have this. Oops. So the universe structures itself in using this logic of holons. So it's basically a sort of like a nested dolls phenomenon, where you have atoms and molecules, then you have molecules in cells, cells in organisms like humans, and of course the sort of naive belief of humans is that this logic stops with humans, and that when you have 7 billion humans or more on a planet, they call that like an ecosystem or a biosphere. Terms that do not imply intelligence and consciousness or awareness. So it's funny because the humans think of this as non-conscious, 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 and basically this is all like robots. No free will, nothing. And then you have humans that is like conscious and intelligent and whatnot. And then when you go above humans, when you start looking at whole ecosystems and stuff, that is still like that's robots again. And even humans, though, even though we have all of these ideas about humanity, when you look at what some scientists at least say about humans, they question the existence of free will and basically say that humans are but a very sophisticated robot made of tiny machines that are cells that are pre-programmed to do certain things, and that we are just the sum total of billions of chemical reactions, which are a succession of cause and effect, which, if we had computers sophisticated enough, we could reverse engineer and predict how a certain person would behave 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. And there are many science fiction movies made about that, whether it's Minority Report or Devs, for instance, the series Devs. We have a quantum computer that can basically just predict, go into the future, into the past, replay things and whatnot. And those sets of beliefs are actually what's the reason why we're having this coronavirus. And I'll explain a bit why. So the thing is, at each stage here, when you go from atoms to molecules, molecules to cells, cells to humans, the most important principle is harmony. And that is finding the rules which allow for a harmonious interaction of all the parts for them to form a bigger whole, which then becomes a part in yet a bigger whole. But what about these rules? How do they emerge? And you see, the thing is, every structure draws inspiration for the emergence of those rules via an inside-outside logic. That is, every structure is just attempting to replicate the harmony that is inside, because otherwise it would not exist. For instance, atoms have a harmonious interaction, are a form of the harmonious interaction of all of the parts that they are made of, which is electrons, neutrons, protons. And that harmony is the source of inspiration for creating yet a higher form of harmony between themselves so they can form molecules. And that process goes all the way to humans. And so if you apply that principle to humans, then what are the only things that are predetermined and pre-coded inside of us as humans that are harmonious and therefore serve as the guiding principles for what we manifest on the outside, trying to reach a state where humans interact harmoniously on the outside. And the only two things that are determined from birth are the DNA, you could say, or the way that, well, DNA is for cells, like the way their body works. So our body, so all of the organs, all of this, the way the cells work and skeleton. So basically just how our inside works, our brain, all of the systems. And the other thing is there's an experience also that is universal to all of humanity, and that is gestation while we were in the womb. So while we're in the womb, even though there are minor differences between one pregnancy to another, still that experience inside the womb is nearly universal with slight variations. But once there's birth, then the experiences separate and branch out into, well, an infinite number of experiences, of course. No two babies are welcomed in the same way and have the same parents and have the same experience once outside the womb. And so those are the only two sort of guiding elements for replicating that harmony on the outside. In order to form a collective global organism, consciousness, whatever you want, basically a new being that emerges from billions of humans, and of course all of the other layers below them, which is animals, plants, whatever, minerals, finding the rules to interact in such a way, a harmonious way, to form something bigger than the sum of its parts, and that process replicating into infinity, basically, until consciousness basically envelops the entire universe, and then it's the universe knowing itself via a conscious awareness of itself, via the experience of itself. But we're still very far off from that result. I mean, basically, what we would achieve is a conscious planet, a planet conscious of itself. And so it would consider you as a cell inside its own organism. So you would be perceived as being inside from the consciousness of the being that we would be a part of. And you would be taken care of in the same way as your body takes care of its cells, which subjectively is experienced as paradise, of course, because your cells, they receive all the oxygen they need. They're free to express their individuality, so to speak, to the best of their abilities. They're recognized for it. They're celebrated for it. So why the coronavirus? What is this whole thing? So the first thing we have to say is that there is a sort of an evolution, that principle in the universe where all of these forms, going from the single-celled organism all the way to humans, you go through all kinds of different intermediary forms. And you form pluricellular organisms, until more complex, until you form animals, and then, let's say even plants here. So there are plenty of intermediary steps and building blocks until you reach humans. But for humans, you could say that basically humans are the bridge between the world of biology, material reality, and the world of ideas, or immaterial. So material versus immaterial. And humans form a network. And just like in biology, you have different evolutions, like the human went through different evolutionary stages, like the Homo erectus, I don't even know what the stages are called, but say habilis or whatever, until we reach Homo sapiens. Well, so too the human network goes through an evolution in terms of their ideas, or what I would rather call their paradigms, which is a sort of an operating system or a filter for bringing down ideas into the material plane. So when you're under the paradigm of monotheism, for instance, that brings a certain number of ideas into reality, like, for instance, building huge cathedrals. And you have a lot of humans that are brought together to build those manifestations. A cathedral is an idea, a house is an idea, a car is an idea. And humans have that particular power of being the bridge between an immaterial reality where all of these things, quote unquote, exist as pure information, pure potential, unrealized, unmanifested, and bring it into a manifested physical form. When you switch to a science paradigm, then humans can manifest a Hadron Collider, for instance, which is the kind of new cathedral for, that kind of paradigm. But the principle of evolution and switching from one paradigm to the other is the same as the evolutionary process of going from Homo erectus to Homo habilis to Homo sapiens. These are all paradigms that allow you to materialize ideas every time in a different way, with new methodology, with a new kind of limitation or focus on what ideas you want to pull from the infinite pool of ideas that could ever exist. And the problem is, what humanity has a tendency to do is whenever they have a new paradigm, they believe it's the truth. And they sit on it. They don't want to move. They don't want to budge. And inside their paradigm, they also have limitations. So just imagine, like, you are an ape, you move from living in the jungle where you have plenty of trees and whatever to the savannah, and you refuse to stand up to look, to be able to see where the predators are. Well, your experience is going to be very painful because you're going to be bitten in the rear end by predators. So you'd better evolve. And the same goes for paradigms. Certain paradigms reach their limits, and then it can really be a very painful human experience if you stay stuck in a paradigm when the general sort of environment, or where the evolutionary push is edging you onward and pressing you to advance and to evolve. Just like the ape basically finds itself in a new environment, a new situation out of, that's just how reality is. It's constantly challenging you in new ways, and you constantly have to adapt. And if you fail to adapt, you'll soon feel the inadequacy of your lack of adaptation to the environment. Like, another metaphor is very simple. It's like the four seasons. When you go from winter to spring, there always comes a time where you're taking your big fat coat off and start wearing just a sweater or even a t-shirt. But there isn't an objective moment where everybody takes their coat off at the same time and everybody puts on their t-shirt. But taken like within a certain number of weeks or whatever, you can clearly see that you've taken your coat off and now you're wearing t-shirts. And it's the same for these paradigms. Every paradigm hits a limit as to what can be experienced within that paradigm, and then you have to expand that bubble to expand the experience of humanity and go further. Just like our bodies evolve, just like everything evolves in the universe. And so there is a clear parallel, first of all, between the last paradigm shift, when we went from well, basically religion to science, and now when we're moving from science to a new paradigm which some would call spirituality, but it's a bit broader than that. So let's draw the parallels. It's very easy. So religion. Problem is, let's project ourselves into the 14th century or so. Apocalypse. Everybody's calling about the apocalypse. The end of the world is near. And with that kind of belief, imagine that, again, humans are the bridge between the world of ideas and reality and the physical. So if enough humans cultivate the same kind of ideas, they're bound to manifest those ideas in some form. They're going to take certain form. And we do that all the time. For instance, if a lot of humans have the same idea about democracy, then democracy is going to manifest itself through the power of the collective belief of people in democracy. Because it's not tangible. It's not tangible, and then we make it tangible via the collective belief we have in the existence of that concept here. And then it manifests itself in the physical through voting, through parliament and all that. But that's just the physical manifestation or material manifestation of holding, or a humanity as a collective, holding the same idea and focusing on it hard enough. Because then it just, it's the energy that you put into it and manifest something on the outside. So many people concentrate on the apocalypse, and what do you have? You have the Black Plague, where nearly a half of the population dies. And then, so that's one limit of this paradigm. It was clear. It's like there's this apocalypse. If too many people believe in that, then the human experience comes to an end because you manifest your own demise, basically. And then you have the Inquisition and witch burning and all that stuff. And what are these two events? They are but manifestations of the limits and contradictions and problems of a certain paradigm. They're meant for you to feel the limits and to correct course, to correct or to change your beliefs. Which, by changing your beliefs, it makes you go from one reality to a new reality. And I always tell this story, it's very interesting. Like, you have lightning strikes and you have a tribe 10,000 years ago that think that the gods are angry with them somehow, and the chief summons his oldest son or youngest son, whatever, and sacrifices him, does a sacrificial ceremony so that the gods are not angry anymore with them. And so fast forward to today, and lightning strikes, and you just have a lightning rod, and that's the end of it. Now, the outside event didn't change. What changed is the paradigm that you overlay and you place over this reality that you observe, this, spectacle of light. And the meaning that you give it via the paradigm that you adhere to then determines the action that you're going to, engage in. And then there is simply an adequacy or an inadequacy with the outside evolution. Like, for instance, if you refuse to stand on your two legs in the savannah, then there is an inadequacy between your action and the experience, the outside experience. And that prompts you to change. And the same applies here. Like, you do an action, like you sacrifice your son, and after a while you sort of realize that action is not really adequate. And then there may be other ways of interacting with reality that are more adequate, that are less painful, more harmonious. And that's how you advance from one paradigm to the other. But since humanity is still in this frame of mind where we always move from something false to something true, then we're forced to go through very painful events that show us the limit of a certain paradigm before we have a reason, an objective reason, to move to another paradigm. So that's the unfortunate thing. Now, science to spirituality. Science of its own accord is announcing an apocalypse, which is climate change. But it's also manifests itself via biodiversity loss, lack of natural resources, pollution. There's just a million of them. And if that wasn't enough, then you have the coronavirus that hits. And every time you have to have an event that hits humanity, and then the inadequacy of the existing paradigm to handle it. Regardless of how many times you prayed and you did your prayers, you couldn't protect from the Black Plague. But there were those weird people that were called doctors at the time that were practicing medicine with plants. And they had these weird ideas that if you had better hygiene and all that stuff, then you could shield yourself from the Black Plague. Funnily enough, their recommendations were much better suited to fighting the Black Plague. And then on top of that, the Inquisition painted a disgusting caricature of what religion actually is. Religion, there's this message in religion of, love thy neighbor like you love yourself and all kinds of things. And the Inquisition is all but that. It's hatred, violence, what, witch burning and all kinds of things. Disgusting. And so on the one hand, you see that the existing paradigm is ill-equipped to deal with certain problems, and a new paradigm is better equipped at dealing with them. And at the same time, you see the old paradigm under the worst possible caricature form. And you see, it is exactly the same that we're experiencing today in mirror. So you have vaccines. Now you have 1, 2, 3, soon 4 or 5 doses, with side effects that apparently in some cases are much worse from one dose to the other. They're beginning to be spaced out less and less, so you have to take them every 6 months, now every 3 months. And you have these variants that appear constantly. So, science is basically virtually powerless. It's giving itself the illusion that it has things under control when it actually doesn't. Just like, the priests would say that they have everything under control under the Black Plague when clearly they had nothing under control. And then you have the scientific equivalent of the Inquisition, where the people that refuse to get vaccinated are the new ones that should be burned at the stakes, or persecuted in one way or another. Of course, it's not as dramatic as in the days. We're not actually being burned, but we're burned in other symbolic ways, as in grilled on the media, or virtual lynching, basically, where we're being virtually stoned to death on social media or whatever. So that's the Inquisition. And the Inquisition, the scientific Inquisition, is also a gross caricature of science, because science has never pretended that it could make those kinds of political decisions. Science is just a method for interrogating reality, and science can only spew out numbers, and those numbers, then the action that you take on those numbers, are always in the hands of humans and are always subjective. And normally science acknowledges that. I'll give you an example. Science can tell you what's your probability of dying from a car accident. But science cannot tell you whether or not you should be afraid of driving in your car, or whether you should be driving at all. And the same goes, for instance, on the whole debate of whether we should install nuclear reactors or wind farms. Again, science can calculate the probability of a reactor failing and a radioactive contamination of a certain zone and whatever. But ultimately, it's a really subjective human decision of assessing that risk in a subjective way, whether you feel that it's more important or less important, or whether you feel like you're more afraid of not having enough power because there's not going to be enough wind, or whether you're more afraid of being contaminated and all that cannot be objectified. So science, when it starts doing politics, it stops being science immediately. But that's the face that it took. And of course, science also is being caricatured as what I was saying earlier, that, for instance, there is no free will, and that humans are just very sophisticated biological robots. And that belief is being also exacerbated because when you look at the way that we're being treated with all the vaccines, we are treated like robots. We're basically treated like cars. And every year you have to go to do your control, your technical control, to see that your car is in order of functioning. You have to replace the oil, you have to replace the brakes, and if you don't do it, you get a fine and all that stuff. Ultimately, your bodies are being now treated as if they were a vehicle, a car, where you apply the exact same methodology, like the exact same vaccine, which has the exact same chemical components, regardless of the different body morphologies and like the specifics of your body, basically, that all humans are different and all that stuff. All that is swept under the carpet. Now you just apply one solution, one size fits all to all of humanity, just like you would replace a broken part on a car. And that is just a gross caricature of science and this scientific paradigm, because right now, since humans are stuck in this kind of way of thinking, they first have to have an objective reason for leaving an outdated paradigm and joining a new one. And so this belief that humans have and scientists have that humans are just a very sophisticated robot, it's as if reality is manifesting experiences which asks humans, are you sure? Are you sure you are a robot? Okay, fine. If you're persuaded that you're a robot, then we'll treat you like a robot. And again, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? And this is also because we are meant at this stage to clarify our beliefs, our belief system. Because on the one hand, we have this belief that is inherited from science that we're just scientific robot, like just very sophisticated robots, that we're bound by the laws of cause and effect, and that our brain takes decisions before we're aware of them. All of these different research that is pointing, quote unquote, in that direction. But on the other hand, we don't behave and we don't act as if those beliefs were correct. Even though we have all these doomsday prophecies, and even though this may spur a hatred of humanity in some respects, that we think we're a parasite, that we don't deserve to live, that we are harming this planet and all that stuff. On the one hand, we hate humanity, and therefore we think that since we're a parasite, we need to be controlled. And that's the only way that we can achieve harmony, because otherwise, left unchecked, the humans will just eat their own planet and then self-destroy themselves. That's one set of beliefs. But then on the other hand, we still have children, we're still, enjoy dinners with family, we still, laugh, we still love going to the movies, enjoy a good book and all that stuff. And so we are in this love-hate relationship with humanity. And we're kind of like this cat, that doesn't know if it wants to stay inside or if it wants to go outside. And the universe is holding this door open and saying, will you go or you stay? And at some point, it's just going to slam the door shut on us and kick us in the butt because, at one point, even you get annoyed if your cat hesitates like that for 20 minutes. And that's what humanity is. It's clarify, at some point, just choose. Do you believe humans are just robots and parasites? Or do you actually think that humans have a purpose, serve a certain purpose, and all that stuff? And so it's more sort of a clarification of our belief systems that we're asked. And it's funny because we believe we're very sophisticated robots, cause and effect, and all these things about research about not having free will. But think about it. If we have, why do we, for instance, celebrate merit? If we hold that belief of humans as being robots, then it would be the same as if you threw two sticks in a river, and the first one that gets to a certain point downstream is the winner. Now, nobody would do that, and we would think that would be completely absurd, as if the stick would have any merit at all. It was just carried by the river, and by chance it was the first one. That is a caricature of how science sees humans, or a certain part of science sees the human as just being a very sophisticated robot that thinks it has free will, but there's this illusion of free will more than a reality of free will. And yet we're so refusing to let that go. So it's interesting to the question is, can you lose something that you never had, basically? And I guess you can only lose the illusion that you had it in the first place. But in any case, that's what that's the reason, one of the reasons at least, for the coronavirus. And there are many more, of course. So this idea of control, again, it's the beliefs that we hold about ourselves is the problems that we have. Like I said, normally it's the harmony that is inside that serves as the inspiration for what you manifest on the outside. But if you have a truncated or a wrong vision about the harmony that is your body, outside it can manifest something terrible. For instance, I'll give you an example. Karl Marx. One of the best ways to describe communism is to each according to his needs, for each according to his means. Or I think it's the opposite, for each according to his needs, and to each according to his means. What that means is that, if you try to summarize it, it's everybody gives whatever they're capable of giving, everybody receives whatever they need to receive. Like, for instance, if you're a very big person and you require more food as a sustenance, then you receive more food. If you're a brilliant scientist, that's what you contribute freely, and then you get whatever you need, which is not a sort of a compensation linked to any objective value of the work that you've done, but simply the fulfillment of your needs. And when that gets translated, that's actually the exact description of how your body works. So that's where that intuition comes from, because ultimately that is how your body functions on the inside. Every single cell does what it's supposed to do, like your skin cells do what they're supposed to do, your stomach cells do what they're supposed to do, and they receive the energy and the resources that fulfills the needs for them to be able to carry out that function. No more nor less. They receive too little, then your body has problems. If they receive too much, then they grow disproportionately, you have cancer, all kinds of problems occur. But when it's interpreted in the days, who decides about your needs? And who decides about your means? And this who decides, and because there was just not the level of consciousness necessary for answering those questions in an enlightened way, then you just have a sort of a dictatorship where you have one person that arbitrarily decides what are your needs. Everybody has to have the same car. Everybody has to have the same amount of food. And that arbitrarily decides what your means are supposed to be. We need 10,000 engineers, so we'll just mandate 10,000 people to go and study and become an engineer, regardless of what their preferences are. I mean, of course, this is a bit exaggerated, but it did happen to many people that they couldn't even choose what they could study because there was a quota of doctors to fill, and they were just okay, study to be a doctor because that's what we need. And so that's a problem when you don't understand the harmony inside. You can have insights that come from the inside, but then when you replicate them outside, your level of consciousness is too low for you to replicate them in a harmonious way. And you have the same debate today, the same problem today with the World Economic Forum and governments, which want to associate AI, social scoring systems and all that control stuff, with a bunch of elites that will decide collectively what the needs and means of humanity are supposed to be in order to control humanity, to make sure that they don't overstep the boundaries of the planet and the resources. And so an AI will basically calculate how much food you are allocated today based on the availability of food within the means of the resources of the planet. But what is this? What is this idea? It's again a wrong understanding of the harmony that is inside, because this is just a physical manifestation on the outside of the misunderstanding of the interdependence between our brain and our body, basically. If you ask humans, any human, you just go into the street and interrogate humans and say, point to where intelligence resides in your body. Where will most people point to? Will they say it's my whole body that is intelligent, or will they say it's the brain that is intelligent? And how do we perceive our brain as well? We perceive it as the boss, the big boss. And what's the proportion between the brain cells, the weight of the brain, and the body? It's very close to this 1%, 99% ratio of that we've replicated on the outside, because we just don't understand how things work. And then you have 1% that are considered as the elite, and 99% which are the dumb, uneducated, stupid citizens that should follow the orders of the enlightened 1% that know what's best for the 99%. Just like many people would believe that your brain is in charge of everything. It's like this dictator that commands your hands to do this and that, and your feet to do this and that. When in fact, your whole body is intelligent. And now we know that you have neurons in your heart, neurons in your gut. So not only you have more than one brain, that's the first thing. And the second thing is your brain is not in control of so many things. So many things happen without your brain ever intervening. Like if you break your leg, your brain doesn't tell every single part of your skeleton and your bones how to actually solder up back together. When you cut yourself, the brain doesn't command the white cells how they should disinfect the womb and the wound, and how it should basically heal itself. So the entire body is intelligent. That's the first thing. And there is a symbiosis between the brain and body. Basically, the body, through feedback and life experience, trains the brain for protecting and managing the body in a better way. Like, for instance, if you sit in a chair in a certain position too long, you're going to receive pain signals for you to move. And so who's the boss now? Is it your brain or is it your body? Your body is sending signals saying, look, something is wrong, move, because otherwise I'm going to send you more pain signals. And so because we have this limiting belief about us being a robot, our brain and our consciousness, symbolically, from the point of view of ourselves, through that belief system, are like an artificial intelligence that sends signals through a network of wires, which is our nervous system, to force your cells to do certain things. And so if you look at, for instance, Elon Musk's Neuralink project and the progress in AI, artificial intelligence, actually I put this as in French, so it's AI, not IA. Anyways, Neuralink project and the internet. The internet is, of course, just a symbolic manifestation of the nervous system on the outside. It would serve as the nervous system of the collective organism that is humanity. And since we believe that our brain is just also something like a sort of very sophisticated computer that we don't really understand, blah, 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 and that we believe that just because you have neurons arranged in a certain way, then they produce consciousness, then we also think that we can create an artificial intelligence that can create quote unquote consciousness. We call that the singularity in that sense. And that being would then control humanity and enslave it, just like unconsciously most of us would say that our brain is the master of your own of the whole body, and the cells in your body, which are its slaves, and that your nervous system is, it's like this Neuralink inside your brain. It's like if it would send you electric shocks to make you do something. Like the AI would control you your whole life. Like, now you should go and repair this, or now you should go. And it's almost like this, in Star Trek, the civilization of the Borg, that are interconnected with the AI, and they're just one collective consciousness, and their bodies are now just robots. So that's what these coronavirus is. Coronavirus is an experience that we've called upon us through all of these limiting and problematic beliefs to choose whether we want to hold on to the belief that humans are just a robot or that we're more than that. And so the elites, the politicians, all of them, none of them are really in control. What is in control is the belief system. And what is in control as well is evolution, this evolutionary drive that never stops. And it's almost like we're being shown the inadequacy of our current belief system with handling problems on the outside, like climate change and the coronavirus, in order for us to change the paradigm and look at all of these things in a different way. And so what I think will happen in a few years' time is that the side effects, the unknown side effects of these experimental vaccines will kick in for many humans. It will be a big, big scandal, just like, the Black Plague and praying and all that was a scandal, and the Inquisition was a scandal. And the only people that will be able to do something about it are energy healers, shamans. Just like during the Black Plague, the only people that could do something about it were the shamans of the day that were practicing this weird thing that nobody understood, which was just a scientific approach to medicine, basically. But at that point, it was magic. And today, spirituality is the new magic. And energy healing, Reiki, shaman ceremonies, ayahuasca, all of these things are mystical, magic, and poorly understood. But nobody's going to take an interest in them, at least not on a global scale, until they have a reason to do so, and especially until they have been a witness firsthand of the powerlessness of the existing paradigm to solve certain problems. And then hopefully we'll also break out of this falsehood to truthhood kind of logic, because that is not at all the way that we should think about these paradigms. Just like you wouldn't say that Homo erectus was false and Homo sapiens is true. It's ridiculous. So that's one big part of the coronavirus. And then confinements, for instance. What are they for? Many reasons. I mean, the first thing is, of course, another symbolic level, for instance, is part of the elites are also playing the role of the placenta, unconsciously. While the baby is still in the womb, all of the resources, the resources that flow between the mother to the baby go through the placenta. It's the intermediary between the mother's resources and the baby. And governments, banks, the huge centralized industries are all playing unconsciously the role of the placenta. And towards the end of pregnancy, that flow of resources can be really constricted. The placenta is not capable anymore of feeding the baby with enough resources. And if you look at the growth curve of a baby across time, if it stays too long in the womb, it goes up and then it sort of levels off and even goes down if it stays past like the 44th week. Simply because it's just not possible to sustain that level of growth in an environment which is limiting. And so confinements, all of these measures that are dictatorial by the governments are just our only way of losing trust in the capability of the placenta to continue to fulfill its role and to switch to something different, which is your lungs and your mother's milk, basically with your stomach. A baby upon birth goes through a very radical energy shift, energy transition, you could even say, from the mother's blood. The mother's blood is currently oil. That's one of the symbolic forms it takes at our level of reality. Oil being the blood of Mother Earth, if you will. To a much more sustainable one, which is infinite, if you think about it. The oxygen in the air is infinite from the point of view of the baby. And that kind of way of distributing energy is much more efficient, much more fair, much more well distributed than the resources that flow through the placenta towards the end of pregnancy. And so loss of confidence in our governments through all of these dictatorial measures, but the confinements have another plus side. It is about trauma. Now, all of humanity has accumulated a ton of trauma on the way to this level of evolution. Whether it be survival-related trauma, that is the fear of death, the fear of not having enough to eat, not having a house over your head, a roof over your head, whether it's psychological and psychic traumas, that is domestic violence, psychological violence, all kinds of things, or existential trauma, that is loss of meaning, not knowing what the hell we're doing here, why is all this happening, what's the meaning of life, why are we here? And all of these traumas need to be addressed and healed, because it's like a single-celled organism cannot keep all of those traumatic experiences that it experienced when it was fighting against other single-celled organisms in a swamp when it decides to form a collective organism, because then it's supposed to cooperate and it's supposed to trust that if it expresses what it is, it's not going to be attacked because it's suddenly vulnerable. Like, imagine if your skin cells, half the time were playing the role of the skin cell, and the other half they're trying to protect themselves from, I don't know, your muscle cells. I mean, you wouldn't stay alive for very long. And confinements are the best way for each person to be forced to revisit and explore their trauma through interacting with the same person. Because typically when you are with someone, like a partner, for instance, your partner or your friends or whatever, your family, they offer you always the opportunity to revisit certain traumas via this mirror. And even people attract them, like people, into their relationships. They get into a relationship with people that have the opposite trauma to theirs, as a kind of a mirror, as a kind of a supplementary thing. So if, for instance, your trauma was that you were never good enough, you're going to call to yourself a partner that will always make you feel like you're not good enough. And before all these confinements and these constricted measures, you could escape that by going to the movies, by having a social life, by traveling, by doing all kinds of activities which are kind of like a symbolic anesthetic to dealing with your traumas and facing them firsthand. But when you're 24/7 stuck in the same environment with the same person that is reflecting to you your traumas 24/7 as well, then it's almost impossible to ignore them anymore. And so every event has multiple layers of significance and importance, and nothing happens for no reason. Everything happens for a reason, and those reasons are as multiple as there are human beings on this planet. And you could talk about the symbolic significance of the coronavirus on so many different levels. For each country, there's something distinct to learn, like about the culture of your country, something specific to your own government, something specific about your politicians, your family, everything. It's just, you can talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but I just wanted to concentrate here in this video on the big picture, but also the individual picture of what is necessary to reach the conditions for becoming one global collective organism. And one of them is to clear out our traumas. One image I like to give is, imagine you're on a boat and you are the one holding the oars. Okay? And your unconscious, that's your conscious you, is here. And that's the one that wants to, succeed in life and, whatever. And your unconscious is in the back seat, and it's the one that's holding all your traumas, unresolved traumas. And what it does is it just sticks its hand into the water. And if you know anything about being on a boat and somebody putting their hand in the water, it creates a drag, which makes your boat drift in a certain direction. And when you're in the front and you're trying to counter that effect, it's going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be extremely tiring. And ultimately, you won't succeed in going where you want to go, because for the unconscious, it's effortless to just plunge their hand into the water and create that drag. For you, the minute you relax a little bit to take a little pause, the boat will completely shift its angle and point into a direction which you didn't foresee or didn't want to go in. And that's the whole idea of why it's so important to resolve our traumas, because they're kind of what transforms humans into effectively robots. Indeed. And that's what determines us much more than DNA and all this chemical blah, blah, blah. ultimately, that is what's really holding humans from acting out of real free will. It is we keep calling into our lives experiences to heal our as opportunities to heal our traumas or to see our traumas. And what is happening now is, if we are becoming a global collective organism that is becoming aware of itself, then humanity has to first, each individual has to become aware of this whole process, the whole mechanism, becoming self-aware of your traumas, of your determinations, of your paradigm, of your belief system. And then one thing that is a true revolution in that sense is choice. Because you see, up until now, because we were in this paradigm of false to truth, to true, then through science, for instance, as a paradigm, it's much more easier to think of reality as something that's given, something that is inert, something that is predetermined, and you're just finding out those rules that are predetermined. But that eliminates choice, because you're just uncovering something that determines you. But once you realize that paradigms are like an operating system that allows you to pool information from infinity to have a certain experience within infinity, and where virtually everything is possible, is just about finding the paradigm that is slightly that is adapted to your level of consciousness, so that your experience is not terminated or too chaotic, then that changes everything. Because suddenly you have a choice. Suddenly you have a choice of believing in science, or believing in religion, or believing in spirituality, or in aliens, or whatever, not because it's true, but because you believe that you want to have that experience. And you believe that experience is, how should I say, most interesting for your life, for what you want to experience during this time that you're alive in your body. I mean, you could just play with this like this. Like, for instance, if you take an atomic bomb and you give it to people 2,000 years ago, did they have the maturity, the sufficient level of consciousness not to just use them blindly and destroy themselves? No. And today, if you look at spirituality and this broadened sort of perspective on what's possible, and seeing reality as indeed just this infinite potential which takes form based on certain rules, then everything becomes possible. But when everything becomes possible, you have to be really careful what you wish for, because you'll end up experiencing it. And that requires a very high level of maturity and consciousness. And it also, when there's choice, there's also responsibility. Because before, you don't consider that you're responsible for the fact that you view the world as through the science lens, and the effects that has on reality in your experience. Now you understand that your choice of beliefs does have an influence on what you experience, and therefore you have to be really responsible about the beliefs you hold and the belief system that you choose. And it doesn't mean that everybody's supposed to move away from science and into spirituality. As a matter of fact, I don't think that would be a good idea at this point. Science, you can think of science, and I've already said this, as the little wheels that you put on the side of a bike when a kid learns to drive. It prevents them, or to ride a bike. It prevents the kid from falling and wounding themselves too often. And so, for instance, imagine if tomorrow we realize that we do have the ability for telepathy. It was just dormant and we never used it. What kind of chaos do you think that would amount to if we used it in the consciousness that we have now? Imagine you're sitting on your toilet and your boss suddenly needs you to write an email. He thinks about you and and starts shoving certain ideas and pushing certain thoughts into your own consciousness just by thinking about reaching you. And that would be most horrible as an experience. And today, what we have is social media, email, smartphones, and through the fact of being reachable, quote unquote, 24/7 via an external physical device, it is a way for us to learn that, well, actually, it may be nice to have a sort of a balance between the times when you're reachable and the time you want to be disconnected. And to find that balance, if we switch to telepathy instantly, it would amount to a chaos much, much worse and much, much more traumatizing than what we have today with smartphones. And so these paradigm shifts will navigate through them not in this forceful manner with resistance, like, oh no, now I have to straighten my back and stand on my 2 feet in the savannah. I don't really want to. I'm doing it just because I'm afraid, I'm scared, and I don't want to die. But we'll do it consciously. That means we'll actually start choosing and picking the paradigms and the belief systems that are adapted to our level of consciousness for our own evolution in the most progressive and harmonious way. And that's definitely a prerequisite for forming a global collective organism. Because ultimately, all of these paradigms that we've been through, and I've already said this, are like different parts in your body. In the world of ideas, demons, asteroids, or spirits of nature are just a game of light. They're all equal, quote unquote, in the sense that from the perspective of a being inside the world of ideas, it wouldn't make a difference between all of these things. Just like when you're inside a video game, ultimately all that you see is just code. And you have no idea what's the best way, from the perspective of when you're in the world of ideas, the best way to interact with these ideas once you're in the physical. But that's what our experience is for, is that what's the best way to interact with an asteroid? Well, it might be better to launch a bunch of missiles to blow it out of the sky rather than starting to pray and call upon angels to protect yourself from the asteroid. On the other hand, if you want to interact with the idea of a demon, and once it's sort of this bridge between the material and the physical, is it best to manifest it as an actual creature that is physical, material, or is it better to keep it in this, to interact with that idea through monotheism, through angels, through prayer? Well, that paradigm actually is much better to interact with that idea. And so that's the whole point, is now to, and the same kind of balance will be reached in medicine, for instance. When you break your leg, it's pointless to go to a shaman or an energy healer. But when you have recurring problems that don't go away regardless of the amount of times you go to the doctor, then your body might have a message for you that you're refusing to hear, and it might be better to go to a shaman or a clairvoyant or an energy healer or whatever. And that's what we're trying to learn, is all of the things that we've accumulated are programs, operating systems, allowing us to interact with certain parts of the world of ideas in the correct way. And all we have to do is to find the right mix, the right way to bring all that together, and then we reach the conditions for us to being born as a global collective organism. And the same happens for a baby, basically. I mean, all of the different organs, first they develop separately, they don't interact with each other, and then they sort of click into place and they start to function interdependently. And that's a whole process. And all of these ideas, all of these thoughts, all these paradigms are like different organs, just a different level. So I've been rambling for long enough, and of course, there's a ton more to be said about the coronavirus, vaccines, and all these things. I'll leave that for a future video, but I think I wanted to give basically an overview of all these things and to especially press upon the idea that um, all of these things that are happening for a reason, and that reason may have nothing to do with you, and that's really important. I'm taking my case, for instance. I have not really substantially changed my way of life. I haven't stopped seeing friends. I haven't stopped having any social activities or tried to keep, going outside and seeing people. And I still haven't had the coronavirus. I still didn't catch it, regardless. I mean, I'm sure I was in contact with it at one point or another, but I've never had the symptoms. I've never had the disease. I mean, I've made several tests. There's no trace of the disease. It's been 2 years. Now, some people would say I'm lucky. Now, I don't think so. You see, the anti-vaxxers that are still stuck in the scientific paradigm of reality, they are just the other side of the coin of the pro-vaxxers, the ones that are pro-vaccine. Because both camps are stuck in a scientific materialist paradigm, and both camps are trying to prove objectively that the other side is wrong. That either they want to prove through statistics, research, case studies, whatever, that the vaccines are dangerous, or they want to prove that the vaccines are effective. And so they are still in this logic of right and wrong, false and true. And so when you are in that kind of energy, then you will have anti-vaxxers which are now repenting because they have the coronavirus, they have the severe symptoms, they are in hospital intensive care, and then they do these videos, they're saying, I'm sorry, I should have taken the vaccine. And then on the other side, you have pro-vaxxers, which develop very frightening secondary, side effects due to the vaccine, were never properly informed about it, and then they would go on saying, I shouldn't have taken the vaccine, that was a terrible mistake, and they didn't inform it's terrible. But ultimately, those are just, again, two experiences not aimed at you switching sides in that coin where you just flip from one side to the other, but to see the coin for what it is and look at it from the outside, from a broader paradigm. And as you can see, when you move from religion to science, for instance, the power that the priest had over the fact that you will get the Black Plague or not does not affect you anymore. That is, those early doctors that were practicing early medicine, regardless of whether the priests were saying, you will go to hell and you will be damned and the devil will find you and you will also die of the Black Plague, none of that affected them anymore because they were in a different paradigm that transcended religion. And so when you fully made the switch to a paradigm that understands science for what it is, understands that your belief system is ultimately responsible for your experience, and that you do not negate the fact that the experience of those that still remain in the science paradigm is wrong or false, then you do have the freedom to live in your kind of bubble of reality and to be the oddball that defies all statistics, that never appears in the statistics in the first place. And if you try to objectify that, then you get dragged into this whole thing, into this whole inquisition and everything. For instance, if you're a doctor that is practicing medicine during the Black Plague and you're healing people here and there, going from house to house, that's one thing. And the church will not necessarily hunt you down for that experience. If you brutally interrupt Mass and start screaming to the top of your lungs that the priests are a fraud and that you have the solution to all of their problems, then you're directly confronting the belief system of thousands of people and their beliefs will actually be projected upon you. And you will better have a very, very strong belief system in order not to start manifesting symptoms of the Black Plague just because of how much hatred and these and beliefs these people will project upon you. And that's the reason, for instance, why so quote unquote miracles, which are called by medical doctors spontaneous remissions, that's why these spontaneous remissions, quote unquote, which I prefer to call miracles, never happen when you're in the hospital with 10,000 monitoring instruments that are monitoring your every vital signs and 10 doctors that are around you monitoring how your disease is healing and developing. Typically, what happens is you just go home, then you come back for a control 3 months later, and the doctors say, "Oh, your tumor has disappeared. Well, congratulations, spontaneous remission." But they're never actually a witness to that. They're never actually looking at how that process happens live in front of their eyes. So if you go into a hospital and start saying, "I'm immune to the coronavirus because I am a very spiritual person, I believe all that stuff is horse crap, and it's been 2 years I didn't have the coronavirus," chances are you're actually going to get the coronavirus at that point. It's a bit like if you were in second grade, you've passed all the exams, and you wanted, and all your friends are still in first grade and they're still passing their exams there, and the teacher is watching over the exams, making sure they go through smoothly, and you're sort of going into the exam room and starting to look at what other students are doing, trying to tell them what the answer to the questions are. Chances are the teacher is going to grab you by the neck and make you sit down at a desk and retake the test again, even though you've already done it, even though you've already made it to second grade. And so it's only if you stick your neck out and you're actually going into that play and taking part in all that drama that you could get sucked in, and then you could suffer from getting the vaccine, getting caught by this inquisition, scientific inquisition, getting the coronavirus, developing bad symptoms, because this is not about anything to be objectified or proving anything to anyone. It's about proving something to yourself, and living happily with that newfound paradigm, newfound belief system, and helping all those that are willing to shift their level of beliefs to a new belief system, and understanding that this process is flawless and that it'll happen because that's how, just like spring arrives after summer, just like we switch from monotheism to science, these are things that are a bit beyond us. Just like a baby goes from the 32nd week to the 33rd week to the 34th week, because understand that in any case, unconsciously, we are attempting to replicate the harmony that we have inside on the outside, even though we do it in sometimes a disharmonious way. But that is just to show us the inadequacy of the inadequacy between what we see on the outside and what we are on the inside. And that is our compass, our internal compass that cannot be changed, because it's not because you believe that your brain is the dictator that it makes it so. You can have the illusion that that's so, but it's not so. And the same for plenty of other things. So yeah, I guess my main message is, don't worry so much about the collective. Help whoever you can help. Don't get sucked into this play, this theatrical play that they're playing, because some people will need to go through the experience and the proof that science has reached its limits, that it's powerless, and that all the governments are corrupt and all that stuff, and lose faith in the placenta in order to move on and move forward to a new paradigm. But some people don't need that experience. And if you don't need that experience, then by no means should you go through all this initiation, being burned at the stakes, being pointed fingers at, and all that stuff. If that's not what you need for your own personal evolution as a person, as an individual, maybe you're already ready, and then you can create your little island of freedom, your little bubble of freedom, without necessarily fighting against the old paradigm. So I hope that's clear. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to comment. I hope you enjoyed this video, and talk to you next time.